Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Salado Blanco Wash Processed Colombia from Mock Coffee. And there's the bag right there. And Mock, based out of Brussels, Belgium. And they were originally a suggestion to us by Yokata. So shout out to and thank you to Yokata for the suggestion. This coffee was also sent to us by our good buddy Zach. So shout out to and thank you to Zach as well for sending us this coffee. This is Mock's second ever appearance on this channel, having recently reviewed the Las Lajas, which turned out to be a coffee I enjoyed a lot more than I anticipated enjoying. So this gives us an opportunity to review a wash processed coffee of Mock's, and that means that we have one washed and one non-wash processed review from them on this channel. So I'm looking forward to discussing this one, as this right here is day 42. And recipe we went with for this coffee is our standard recipe, a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 205 degrees Fahrenheit, about 96 degrees Celsius. And I honestly didn't have a preference for brew method, as the V60 offered a little bit more body and the Chemex offered a little bit more clarity. However, the coffee was pretty consistent regardless of which brew method we went with. Now, roast profile for this one, it's in line with the previous experience, as they do tend to roast on the slightly lighter side of things by most spectrums and metrics. They're not particularly an overly light coffee roaster, as this one isn't necessarily in line with a lot of the super light Nordic coffees, but it is still moderately light by most people's standards. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 23, first impression, and the coffee came out unusually citric, as it was almost reminiscent of the recently reviewed Las Lajas, and that was one thing I found to be somewhat strange about it, given that it had a little bit of these almost red berry characteristics to it, and an unripened pineapple, which were things I experienced with the Las Lajas review we had. So it was a very unexpected first impression, not in line with my expectations whatsoever. We continue on to day 26, as I ran it through the Chemex, and it came out a little bit more clean on this run, as it had a little bit more of the orange components that are listed on here, as it was a slightly sweeter citric aspect to it. Much more of the listed chocolate was present within the cup as it cooled down, as it was slightly cleaner and a little bit more sweet, as it was skewing a little bit more in the direction I expected it to. Even then, it still had a little bit of this kind of Las Lajas-like feel to it. Day 28, ran it through the April dripper, and the cup is slightly more balanced on this day, as the citric brightness is on the forefront, with the listed nuttiness being a little bit more pronounced. Can feel some more of the robust characteristics to it, as there was this honey-like feel within the background of the cup. Best day of the coffee to this point. We continue on to day 31. As we ran it back through the V60 with higher temperatures, and the coffee then took a turn towards the nutty direction. And this is why I didn't necessarily prefer warmer temperatures for this one, as it really seemed to accentuate a lot more of the nutty characteristics to this coffee, which typically isn't necessarily my favorite. The cup as a whole was a little bit better balanced, though, as there were some more citric aspects in a less dominant manner on this day. Cup just felt slightly more sweet, so it was a better day overall, but I honestly felt that was just attributed to a little bit more time and rest as opposed to the adjustments in the recipe. Day 34, another better balanced day of the coffee, as the citrus is bright again, a lot more in line with the other Colombian characteristics though, as it's slightly nutty and chocolatey, has a little bit more of the lasting nuttiness in the cup as well. So it's improved. I'm getting a little bit more nuttiness with the coffee over time, but it's not necessarily as defined, strong, or pronounced, with a little bit more of a cool down as opposed to when we ran it at the much more warm temperatures. Day 36, coffee is the best it has been to this point, as it's wonderfully balanced, and this is why I didn't necessarily differentiate between either of the brew methods, is once we got post the 5-week mark, the coffee really seemed to give a lot of balance as well as consistency, as both brew methods yielded similar results, bright at the forefront with a slightly citric sweetness, but also clean and even with a pleasant bit of nuttiness in the finish, with a sweeter chocolate that's also keeping that citrus in good balance. So a lot of the notes that they have listed on here, I was experiencing from those earlier days a somewhat fermenty red berry aspect at the start of this coffee has seemed to really kind of clear up and focus, get a little bit more definition to the cup in general. Day 38, the cup has settled nicely to a lot more of the traditional lighter profiled Colombian coffee characteristics, as it's still slightly on the sweeter side of the citric aspect. That's very much present on the forefront with the chocolate base on the back end. More in terms of the savory nuttiness is present in the aroma than in the actual cup itself, though it does open up a little bit more in that direction upon the cool down. But for the most part, it's a pretty moderate cup all around, just kind of enjoying the way it has settled into a much more crowd pleaser sort of coffee. Day 40, final notes we have, cup has reached a level of consistency as it continues to focus on those slightly more citric aspects at the forefront of the cup. It's a little bit of that brightness, while contrasting a lot more of that coffee with the traditional characteristics on the back end. So a good balance to the cup. Again, that's been pretty consistent post that 5-week mark. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have a lot of level 4s, so let's go through those real quick. We'll start with the body, level 4. And that does indicate that this tasting wheel was made with the V60, as this coffee did have a fair bit of body through that brew method. As I kind of mentioned, a slight bit more clarity. The clarity here is at that level 4 mark, and I would say it's on the slightly lower side of the level 4 with the V60, but very much a true level 4 with the Chemex. So that's going to be your differentiating factor, is you could probably bump the body down to a level 3 with the Chemex, and you'd still keep the cleanliness at the level 4. So that's the only big difference I would change between either of those two brew methods. Finish, level 4. Yes, truth be told, the finish wasn't necessarily my favorite part of this coffee, as it did skew a little bit more in that nutty, chocolatey sort of direction, which is traditional, what you'd expect for a wash-processed Colombian coffee, especially a Pacamara. But even then, I kind of enjoyed the way it finished, given just how bright and citric it was at the forefront. It really did help balance out the rest of the coffee. Sweetness, level 4. Yes, this is another positive thing. I think this is the biggest positive I've had from both of the mock coffees we've reviewed, is in theory, I could see both of the coffees we had being a little bit more on the less sweet side of things. And this one right here still had great sweetness to it throughout the entirety of drinking it. The citrus was sweet, the chocolate was sweet, the nutty aspects were sweet. So all of the big factors within this cup did yield much more sweet results. So for that reason, I really like it being there at the level 4, even if maybe on the slightly lower side of that level 4. Acidity, level 4, and that does kind of distinguish just how light this coffee was, given that there was a fair bit of brightness throughout the entirety, especially given it is a washed Colombian Pacamara coffee. So I could have expected that to maybe be a little bit more toned down, but for the most part, it's bright, has a fair bit of brightness to it, so that really does demonstrate the sort of roast profile we're going with on this one. Citrus, level 4. Yes, I would say that that's the first thing you notice, the most distinct thing at the very forefront of the cup. So there's no part of that that deserves to be anywhere else. Very bright citric aspect in the cup, also on the slightly sweeter side of things. And then the chocolate, level 4. Once again, something you're very much experiencing within this coffee, but this one much more on the cool down. I think a lot of the things I've said throughout the review to this point are demonstrated here in this tasting wheel. As you can see, they're in significant enough abundance to really kind of give this tasting wheel balance in specific directions. But since we have so many level 4s, it really goes to show just how much depth there was in this coffee, even if a little consistent, even if a little well structured in general. And then the savoriness is, I think, the only thing worth discussing as well, which is at that level 3 mark, and that's kind of attributed to a more kind of nutty, savory aspect within this coffee. So I don't have too much to say on that. That was maybe the third most pronounced characteristic, but at the same time, I was maybe trying to keep that a little dialed back, given I just did enjoy the citric aspect a little bit more than the other parts of this coffee. So with the adjustment on the body, I think that this is a pretty good looking tasting wheel for what I experienced for both brew methods. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I thought it was good. Again, both of these coffees are a little bit above expectation, and truth be told, I think it's because neither of these two coffees that we've reviewed from Mock have necessarily been types of coffee that I would traditionally go and pick out if there were a bigger selection of coffees available to me. So I do want to maybe try one of their Kenyans, maybe one of their African coffees. I haven't looked too hard to see what else they offer. It's been a little bit of a treat that I've been able to get my hands on some Mock coffees, and for the most part, the stuff that I have seen hasn't necessarily been coffees that I would tend to go for in the first place. So these two have been ones that are a little bit more in line with my preferences, but even with that, neither of them are necessarily types of coffees that are my preferences to begin with. So this one right here, there were a lot of positives to take away. A little bit more of the sweetness, a little bit more of the brightness that was present within this one. And given that both have slightly exceeded my expectations, I think that's a really good sign for how I might feel about Mock's coffees in general. So hopefully coffee roasters or multi-roasters in the United States will continue to bring in Mock so I can try more of their stuff. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. This is a very easy suggestion recommendation. It goes towards somebody that does like their lighter profiled South American coffees, but in the more traditional sense, because this one still had a lot of the traditional aspects, chocolate, nut, and a little bit of fruit brightness to it as well. Plenty of body and still a great bit of sweetness to it while not sacrificing too much of the clarity. So that yields itself towards a much more traditional Colombian coffee drinker. But even then, given that there's that fair bit of brightness, it does still have the lighter profiled aspects that do come from those coffees as well. So your lighter profiled traditional coffee drinkers, kind of the best direction I can point somebody towards and kind of the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee or anything from Mock, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it or them as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if not already subscribed. And this right here has been a review of the Salado Blanco Wash Process Colombia from Mock Coffee. Thank you for watching.